Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is City of Heroes. Let's rant with Scrapperlock on the Rebirth server. We are with our now level 18 character Psyop, and we're on a story arc for Victor Chernenko, which we're going to ignore because this is a rant. So let's see, which one are we doing? This one, I think. Busting gang leaders and their crews. We do that a lot in this game. Heading to Steel Canyon, and today we're going to rant. And so today I'm going to respond to something that was commented in Let's Rant Video 7, where I was talking about breaking the game. And one of my commenters, whose handle is RB. So thanks for the comment, RB. And I want to just sort of discuss something that came up in the comment. Now, one of the things I want to be very clear about is I try not to have any sort of debates with my commenters this way. I'm not going to argue with what RB said. I don't think it's fair for me to have a 40-minute audio rant arguing with something that somebody could only respond to in a paragraph of text. Right? So if I'm going to disagree or debate a little bit, I'll try to do that in the comments because I think that's a fair way to have a debate where we both are using the same medium. I feel like otherwise me coming on here and arguing with somebody who made a comment and was kind enough to make a long, thoughtful, multi-paragraph comment is unfair, it's unsporting. That's not how you have a fair debate. So I'm perfectly willing to have those kinds of back and forth disagreements in text, but I would like to not do that here. Unless you guys say you want me to do that and the people making the comments want me to do it, and they say, okay, it's not unfair, let's hear your thoughts, then I might be willing to, but I would only do that if the specific person said to me, please post another rant about that and give me your thoughts, because otherwise I feel like it's unfair, and I don't want to have an unfair debate. To me, that's not the point of having a discussion. The discussion is how we learn about stuff, and that's how we grow and think about things in new ways and that sort of thing. And the whole purpose of this Let's Rant series is that hopefully maybe some folks listening will think about things in some new ways, or contribute to the comments and make me think about them in a new way. And so in RB's comment, and you can go read it yourself, I had been talking about breaking the game, and the comment was about, well, are you really breaking the game if you're using the in-game rules? That's not the part I want to focus on. Later down in the comment, in the second or third paragraph, what the comment talked about was how difficult it is for RB, and I would agree myself, to run the game of D&D specifically as the characters level up. And so what we're going to be talking about today is the power curve of a role-playing game and the importance of how that's balanced for the way the game master can run the game. Right? And this isn't just D&D, but we're going to use that, and in my comment response I used Champions and D&D because those are the two games I'm probably the most mechanically familiar with. I don't want to talk too much about Savage Worlds because I've never really played it all the way through, so I can't comment on how you would be affected in terms of running it if we went all the way to Legendary, right? I've seen it played all the way to Legendary in a Let's Play by the Wildcards group, but watching it is not the same as playing it, and playing it is not the same as running it. So let me talk about what I mean by the power curve, right? The power curve is how the character increases their capabilities as they level up, right? So you can see that with this character. We started out with this one attack, right? And we now have 4 attacks, one of which is an assassin power. We had this 1 defense, now we have 3. We have become completely immune to most holds. Most holds are a 6 mag or below. Well, usually most of them are 3. So 2 stacked holds won't affect us. We would need 3 stacked holds on us. So soloing with this character, unless we're against an archvillain or something, we're almost never going to get held or stunned or slept or entangled or anything like that. So we have increasing numbers of abilities as you level up, and this is very common, right? You increase the number of options that you have. And then the individual options become more powerful. So for this character, for example, when we were low level, we didn't have as many slots because you gain slots as you level. And so if you go back and look at the older video, well, Reconstruction only had one slot and we only had a trainer on it. So the recharge rate of Reconstruction, which is normally a minute, I maybe got it down to 52 seconds. Now it's down to 38 seconds, which means almost twice a minute now we can heal. And when there are single origin enhancers on it, literally twice a minute I can heal instead of once a minute. That's doubling the healing rate. In addition, we'll be able to double the amount of healing, right? So we're going to be going from 1 healing once a minute to 2 healing twice a minute. We're going to be doing 4 times the amount of healing once we're 22nd level that we did at 2nd or 3rd or 4th level whenever we took Reconstruction. So at 1st level, we didn't even have Reconstruction. By now, we're doing, double heal once a minute, or once every 40 seconds, and by, or 1.5 times heal every 3/4 of a minute. And by 22nd level, we'll be doing a double strength heal twice a minute, right? That's 4 times the amount of healing that we had to start. We became immune, pretty much, to all mezzes at level 16. Before that, we were vulnerable to them. We have all of these attacks, and because we have enhancements in them, they're slowly getting more powerful, and we're doing more. Now, the way City of Heroes handles this is that the villains get more and more hit points, right? And so and they do more and more damage, so you kind of need that to keep up, quote unquote, right? But that is what we mean by the power curve. You're gaining abilities, and those abilities get stronger. And this is done for multiple reasons in a game. The first reason is to indicate the logical consequence of your character going through all of the experiences that it's going through. You're literally gaining experience in points, right? D&D does the same thing. You gain experience points. You presumably will learn something, and then in traditional D&D, after you had enough experience points to gain a level, you went to a town to train. You went to a wizard's academy, or you went to a barracks with soldiers. You trained, and you used all of the knowledge that you had gained from fighting rust monsters and green slimes and kobolds and goblins in the lairs to help you perfect your technique, so that the next time you encounter those things, you know how to defend better against them, right? And so this is sort of a mechanical way to show the character growing as it naturally would, because we all get better by doing things, right? I am better at the game. Might not be easy to tell because I'm not great at it, but I'm better at the game City of Heroes now than I was when I first started to play it in 2004. Right? And I'm better at it now than I was when I came back to it in 2019, right? Because I was rusty and they had changed some things, and so it took me a while to get my sea legs back, right? But if you look, right, this isn't literal Iron Man, but what are the rules of Iron Man? If you face plant, you have to delete the character. We have not face planted with this character. It's 18th level. Isn't that about the highest I got doing Iron Man mode? And the only other restrictions are you're not allowed to trade down influence. Okay, so that I didn't do. But we probably would have had enough to buy the enhancements we've had. And then you can't run out of a mission to get inspiration. So I've never done that. So I've pretty much been able to play this character on almost Iron Man mode. No face plants to level 18. Right now that I said that, I'm going to face plant, right? So I've gotten better at playing these characters by practice, right? And that's the logic of why experience points would make your character become more powerful, have more abilities. You learn from doing things, how to do them, and you tweak what you're doing to make it better. And that's the mechanical reason why we have improvements to the characters in both the quantity of what you can do and the power level, right? So more things, and the things are more powerful. But there's also a game logic, I don't know how you want to call it, a player psychology reason for doing this as well. And it's maybe more blatantly obvious in computer games because they have like in this game, actual tutorials. But as the now current GM of my temporary game that we just started playing yesterday and was a lot of fun, said when we were talking about what level to start his campaign, right? And my best friend, as typical, because he likes starting high, wanted to start at third or fifth level because he said we're only going to play these characters a few days. Let's let them do stuff. And the new player objected, and she said I really don't like starting out with all these abilities and everything. And the GM said let's start at level 1, and his explanation was the first couple of levels of D&D are like a video game tutorial level, right? It gets you comfortable with your character. The reason City of Heroes starts you at level 1 with one primary and one secondary power, and that's all they are, and they're very simple powers that usually have a simple effect like a punch, like this thing is very simple power, and it recharges very quickly, right? And then you've got some sort of a toggle if you're a scrapper or a stalker. The reason they start you out that way is so you don't have too many things to click on and figure out, right? You don't even know when you first start the game how you want to set up your UI. I mean, I have a way of doing it now that probably annoys some people because it's very odd. But I have a way that I like to do it, and I'm used to it now. But when I first started, I didn't, like, part of the reason I keep this tray here in the bottom is because that's where they had it when you started playing City of Heroes, and I just got used to it there. Right? Other people moved it around, because you could move it, but I just kept it where it was. And one of the reasons I've always stayed on 2 trays instead of 3 is because City of Heroes always had 2 trays, so I got used to it. And then to get the toggles out of the way, I started putting them over here. And I don't remember how I started doing that. I think I had done Star Wars Galaxies with things over here. I can't remember now. And so some of it's just what I got used to. And while you're getting used to that, the buttons might not be where your fingers need them to be, right? And so over time, you figure out what is comfortable for you. And they realize that you're going to have to do that, so they try to give you a smaller number of things to click on, a smaller number of elements to the UI, so that when you're making changes, you're not changing 88 buttons at once, right? And similarly, if you look at, say, a D&D character, right? It starts out, my ranger at level 1, all he had was a bow and a short sword. There are no spells. We got up to level 2 at the end of the first session, and again, we're leveling quickly because it's a temporary campaign, and we're only going to play 3 or 4 sessions. But I didn't have any spells. Now I'm level 2. I've got my first 2 spells. And now I have to learn how to do spell slots. But I had a session during which, as a new ranger, I learned how to do my regular stuff. Just, making attacks, managing my arrows in my inventory. Right now, I've DM'd for 2 years. I know how to do that. But as a new player, it helps you to not have that many variables that you have to worry about. Right? And then you gain a level, and now you've got some spells. Right? Because the assumption is you've played a session or 2 with your sword and your bow, and you know how those work now. So adding spells and spell slots doesn't confuse you too much because it's not adding too much, right? And you only get a couple of spells. What did I take? Cure Wounds and Entangle or something. And that's it. And so, I'm only going to need Cure Wounds if somebody gets hurt. And so the only spell I really have to think about is it's some sort of an Entangle. It's a concentration where if I hit them with my bow and arrow or with my sword, it'll also like restrain them or grapple them. Like some plants come up and grapple them, basically. So now I've got to learn the concentration mechanic and get used to how concentration spells work, right? And then at 3rd level, you get your subclass, and then you're going to get some, let's say I become a Beastmaster, which I'm not. Then I have to get a pet and learn how to manage the pet, right? And so each level, they give you a new thing to do, just like we get new powers, right? Each level we got some new powers. So you have to learn how to manage this build up. You have to learn how to manage your movement powers, right? You have to learn how to manage your click heal power, and you have to learn how to deal with toggles and now your assassin blade and all of that. And so it, by slowly having your character gradually gain abilities, it gives you the chance to sort of train yourself at each level or each increment what the new thing is, right? And you get a chance to add this new power into your cycle, your attack cycle, or whatever. Right? So, like, you get a power that's a reaction now. Well, you've never had a reaction before in D&D. How do reactions work? Right? And so, and I'm pretty sure several of our solo, our whatchamacallit, our Iron Man mode characters died in that encounter because of those little flamey guys. But you see how much easier it is to run with an assassin. This is mute magic. Is this something I can use here? Hang on. I would really rather have accuracy on that. And they're all low levels, so I'm not going to go ahead and use one. So there are two functions to why you get these this increasing power curve. And the characters become more powerful, both because logically they would grow in ability as they learn and develop their skills and so on, and because mechanically it's easier for the player to slowly gain knowledge of how the character works rather than all of a sudden being thrown in. Imagine all of these powers active at once, all on your hotbar as soon as you log in. First time you've never played this character before, you've never played this game before. How would you possibly manage it? It would be very hard and very confusing at first. So they ease you in, right? And D&D is the same way. It's even more difficult on pencil and paper because you don't have a computer automating stuff for you. And so that eases you in. Same thing with Savage Worlds, right? You start with like a couple of edges, some skills, and maybe 3 powers if you have like superpowers or something. And that's it. And you can gain more as you advance, but you only gain them one at a time, one new edge at a time, one new skill at a time, 2 new powers at a time. And by doing that, it gives you a chance to ease in. So that's why this works. So why is it an issue then? Why does this power curve potentially become an issue? Well, one of the reasons it can become an issue is that by changing what the character can do and how much of it the character can do, you are potentially changing the nature of the game. And we see this in Dungeons and Dragons, and this is what the comment was about, that in low-level Dungeons and Dragons, you're dungeon crawling. You're what Matt Colville likes to call rat catchers, right? I hate this mission, but we'll do it. You're rat catchers. You are where am I going to go at? 18th level, I guess, Steel Canyon, sorry. You're rat catchers. You're going down to the basement of the inn and defeating the giant rats down there. You're fighting the goblins in the mine outside of town, right? You're doing this low-level newbie stuff. And the crises that you are hired to engage in are simple kidnapping, maybe a murder mystery around town, and that sort of thing. And these are challenges that are appropriate to your low first, second, third level characters because, again, they may only have a couple of simple or mundane weapons, maybe a few spells, cure late wounds, confusion, that kind of stuff. And they don't have a lot of powerful abilities, so you can't make the players fight like mega demons at third level. But as you level up, the characters become more and more powerful. And in Dungeons and Dragons, the issue is, and I would say this is different from how it is like in certainly Champions. It's absolutely different from how it is in Champions, and even City of Heroes to a degree. D&D in D&D, your character's abilities are what I like to call multiplicative. That is to say, um, the abilities are like what you can do multiplies, right? It doubles and triples and quadruples. And the problem with that is that it's very hard when you're creating challenges to scale those challenges to the players, right? So, like, our character's health, which I'll show you in a minute, we're 18th level, right? And I believe a stalker starts out around something like 100 health, plus or minus a few, maybe 110, right? And now at 18th level, oh, we're being attacked. Hang on. Is this an ambush? Yes, it looks like it. At 18th level, how many hit points do we have? Come on, hover over. 531, right? So, okay, well, that's multiplicative, right? 500 instead of 100. We're 5 times. But we're 18th level, right? We've gone up a lot of levels. How long does it take to go up 5 times in D&D? 5 levels, right? Because you get a hit die every level, and you started with a hit die. Right, so if you're D8 or whatever, you do start a little bit high because you get an automatic max roll on D8, so you'd start with 8. But then you get 5 every level. So you're going to be, by 18th level, your character would have almost 100 hit points. You're going to be 15 times as many hit points as you had, right? And so it scales up super fast. Same thing with the damage. You go from doing 1d8 of damage to doing 2 and 3 and 4. So whereas you have fighters who are doing something like 6 damage on average at first level, they're going to be doing something more like 30 or 40 damage at 10th level. And so when it multiplies like that powerfully, it can be very hard for the GM because the nature of the threat that you're putting up against a party that can do that many more times damage than a low-level party could do has to be different. You have to change the nature of the threat. And this is what RB was talking about in the comment, that at 11, once you get into the double digits, the player characters are almost literally gods. And they can do such powerful things. I mean, they can take out ancient dragons at 10th level. I know that CR says 24 on it. No. It's like a CR 12 or 13 creature and a group of level. I mean, I had a group of level 9s take out an adult dragon, no problem, right? I then took another adult dragon and gave him minions, and they took him out. So there's no question in my mind that at least solo, as rules, and by the way, I buffed the dragons, right? I gave them spells, which they don't have in the original monster manual, and I gave them, I improved their lair actions to make it harder, like make them tougher, and gave it a difficult terrain type, like fighting in lava and stuff. They still beat them, right? A red and a blue at different times within like almost back to back in 2 different sessions. And so, if you can beat an ancient red dragon, your characters are practically gods, right? And they can do this by 10th or 11th level. And so a lot of people think, wow, it's cool, our characters are like gods. Maybe, but that means that I now can't, once I saw what happened, I'm like, okay, I can't use dragons as the enemy anymore. By 13th level, a dragon is trivial, right? I actually, the big bad evil guy was literally based on a god. He was based on the Slod god Yagorl. I did a bunch of tweaks, but I used that to set the power level of, like, what power level do I think this guy should have? And they beat him in 4 rounds with lair actions and everything at 13th level. And so that means that a 13th level party could beat Yagorl, who is a god. So what do you do at 15th level? If 13th level characters are beating demon gods, somebody who's like literally almost as powerful as Orcus, maybe 15th levels could be challenged by Orcus and Tiamat. Where do you go from there? How do you challenge an 18th or 20th level party? You cannot challenge them the way you challenge a 3rd level party, right? And I told the story in the Breaking the Game video, I believe, of the poor DM who was like, his players were like, "Oh, let's do some level 20 gameplay," and he created this dungeon that was supposed to be 3 or 4 sessions, and the poor guy, of course I missed. The poor guy got completely snookered by his players. They just scried down to the bottom of the dungeon, teleported in, killed the guy they were supposed to kill, and walked out. Session over in an hour. Why? Because he created a traditional dungeon, and the traditional dungeon wasn't a challenge for level 20 characters. The nature of the game completely changes in D&D from low to high level. And you might say, well, that's a good thing. It should change. I can tell you right now, my best friend would probably say, but that's a good thing. Our characters should get more powerful, and the nature of the game should change. Here's the problem. There's no guarantee that any particular game master is going to be equally good at running the different tiers of play. They're different skill sets. It takes one skill set to draw a dungeon crawl map, which is the sort of map you would do below level 5, right? With traps and puzzles and tricks and goblins and orcs in it, and maybe a couple of different factions in the dungeon that are fighting each other, and it's pretty cool. And the types of challenges, mimics and green slime on the walls and stuff, and rust monsters that are in that low-level dungeon, are the types of traditional old-school D&D challenges that a DM who's good at making up those kinds of dungeons would be excellent at creating. It's a perfect kind of a dungeon for somebody like Gary Gygax. These are the types of dungeons he makes, and he was good at making them. Okay. But that's not the same skill set that you need for running planar battles against the Slot-Eye in Limbo and mounting going to war against Lord Yagorl. Right? It's a totally different skill set to make up a universe-threatening, world-spanning Marvel Cinematic Universe type of campaign where the challenges aren't about mapping and crawling through a dungeon, but rather are about interplanar politics and cosmic war. Sorry, I had to pause the video briefly there. So the problem with the power curve, if it's changing the nature of the game, right, then that is changing how the GM has to run the game. And not every GM is going to like or necessarily be capable of running it at all the tiers. Right? And I think this is what RB was getting at, saying, well, I really prefer running the low-level game, and when they get into demigod mode, it kind of isn't, maybe not as much fun to run for RB. And I would say for me, too, I like the down-to-earth stories that are more on a human scale, right? And heck, I've even mentioned in this game, in City of Heroes, as a player, right, that I don't really like the end game, like the level 40 plus missions. They all get into these outdoor missions. You're going into cross-dimensional stuff, and you're no longer stopping crooks from harming Paragon City. Now you're like going across the dimensions and trying to like find the fractured souls of the investigators from Portal Corp and stuff. And I feel like the missions become a lot less relatable. Right? It's a lot less of what I want my character, especially Silver Phoenix, who I picture more as a street hero. And like I got very frustrated with the fact that you kind of can't stay a street hero in City of Heroes, right? With that character. And I kind of was like, well, realistically, everything above 30th level is sort of out of character for her. Now, that's me as the player, but I would also argue that with these guys as designers, City of Heroes as designers, right? They were better at these low-level missions. These low-level missions are more fun. The outdoor missions, you guys can comment and let me know what you think, but talking to my supergroup guild, they hate them. Those outdoor missions where you have to like go around the radiation plant and kill every clockwork, and you've got to do it on a timer and stuff. They don't play that like they're when I complain about them, their answer to me is, Scrapper, that's why we do the architect. Because we don't like that. Right? So they're doing the architect to bypass those missions. Right? So this argues for the fact that even the designers of City of Heroes who built the game to do this, yeah, they were better at making missions like this. And when they got into the higher level missions, yeah, they didn't do as good of a job on them. Right? It just wasn't in their strength. They had to change the nature of what they were asking you to do. Also, they had to change the nature of how the villains ran as the heroes got more powerful, right? The way the arch villains are. And a lot of the higher level ones are super objectionable to fight, not because they're hard, but because they're friggin' annoying, right? They had to make them annoying in order to challenge you. There wasn't like annoying you was the only way they could challenge you, right? And so this shows that gaining too much power and changing the nature of the game can make the game not play the same way. And again, not everybody creating content like a DM is going to have the ability to adjust to the different ways to play equally well. So, like, for instance, I'm not good at Palace Intrigue. So if we had to shift into Palace Intrigue, I wouldn't be great at that. Now, I know that that's my weakness, so I don't really try to do that very much. But if the weakness is the high-level play, well, the fact that the player's leveled up means you're walking right into your weakness. Now, some GMs may be better at the high-level game and may not be great at writing dungeon crawls, right? But those guys actually have an easier time in a sense, I would argue. Because if you're better at the cosmic, epic, Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff, you can always start your party at level 8 and just go right into that if you want, assuming the players are okay with it and they don't need to be trained in how to run their characters. Or you can run the low-level stuff really briefly, give everybody a level every session, and after 5 or 6 sessions, you get out of your weak area and into your strength. But if your strength is the low-level game and your weakness is the high-level game, it's like by playing the game and doing the normal progression of the game, you are forcing yourself into the thing that you're not good at by the very nature of playing the game. And that's rather unfortunate. And it happens because the progression is multiplicative, right? In D&D, you get so much more powerful so quickly. It's like almost an exponential curve. It's going up like this. And you say, well, how else could you do it? Well, in Champions, it's linear, right? You gain, at the end of a session, you have a 250-point character to start, and your character is 96 attacks and maybe 20 defenses and PDED and 40 stun. And it's a 250-point character, and at the end of the first scenario, you get 3 XP. That's like 1.5%, 1% of your total power that's gone up, right? In the next scenario, you get 3 more XP. Now you got 6 XP. What can you do with 6 power points? Well, you've got a 45-point multi-power. You can put 4 points into getting a new multi-power slot. So your character started out with, I don't know, Energy Blast, no normal defense, attack, and flash. So now you get an explosion. And you take the other 2 points and you put them into comeliness, and your character's a little more handsome. Right? And that's what you've done after the first couple of scenarios. Whereas your ranger went from not being able to cast spells to being able to cast them to now at 3rd level having like multiple spells they can cast, and they're Beastmasters, so they're summoning a pet. You see the difference between how you increased after a couple of adventures of champions, right? I'm thinking 2 3-session scenarios, 6 sessions, versus 2 3-session adventures for D&D, which would level you up similarly, right? Depending on how you do the leveling up. The dramatic increase. Your champion's character didn't gain any stun. Isn't doing any more damage. Your ranger's hit points have gone up from 11 to like 24, so they've doubled, right? You probably bought better armor. Your AC went up from 15 to 18, so you're much harder to hit now, right? And you've got a Panther that's doubling your attack rate because it can attack too, and doing a lot of damage and can serve as an off tank. And all of that in the same amount of time that a champion's character added an explosion power to their multi-power that they already had. And, oh, I forgot this was a boss here, isn't it? Yeah. I saw him, and then I spaced out that he was there. I'm going to probably die. So much for Iron Man. Your champion's character... Let's get out of here. Your champion's character is just a tiny, 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 tiny little bit more powerful than it was. Just a tiny bit. Right? Whereas the D&D character has like doubled or tripled in power already by 3rd level. And so that's a huge difference. The GM of the champion's character doesn't have to make any changes to how he's building scenarios because you added an explosion slot on your multi-power and went up 2 points of comeliness or presence or whatever. Let's say presence. The DM of the D&D game has to really think about, how am I going to handle having another character, this Panther, in the battle? What are the enemies going to do in response? How do I have to balance it, right? That's a significant consideration for the GM. And unlike champions, where the very villains who challenge the starting champion's character, the same exact villains, the mafia, whoever, are going to be a challenge to your champion's character at 256 points that they were at 250. In D&D, already the goblins and the wolves that would have challenged you at 1st level are trivial at 3rd level. Unless you put a lot of them in there, right? And so even by 3rd level, even though we haven't even gone up in tiers, we have already got a situation. Oh, wait, I got to be landed. You have to be on the ground to do this. We've already got a situation in which the DM has to start making adjustments, and you're only 3rd level. Now let's do a couple more adventures. The champion's character gains, say, another 8 XP over the next 2 scenarios, 4 each. They're a little longer. The D&D character is now 5th level. Right? That D&D character is now walking around with 40 or 50 hit points. Right? What 5th level would be 8 plus 28 plus the, say, 2 con times 5. Almost 40 hit points. Right? Instead of 8. The Panther is 5th level now because it levels up with you. Right? You're making 2 attacks per round. And so you're doubling your attack rate. The Beast has gotten some extra abilities, like it can attack as you can order it to attack as a reaction or some crap like that. You're casting now 2nd level spells and more of them. And you have a series of other features that you can do. And that's just one character, right? Meanwhile, the champion's character with the 8 power points, okay, they just moved their multi-power slot. Let's say they had enough points, it would cost 9. Let's say he's got 9 XP. Moved his multi-power up to 50 points. So now he's 10d6 attack instead of 9d6 attack. So whereas the ranger is doing double damage because they're attacking twice, when you take the attack action, you can make a 2nd attack, right? Doing double damage, basically. The champion's character is doing 1/9 more damage, 11%. They're doing 10d6 instead of 9d6. They do a couple more stun every time they hit. That's it. And the flash lasts a half a phase longer. Maybe. Right? You went from a 4.5 to a 5d6 flash. And so now we have these characters who've been around for 5 adventures. The ranger is like 3 or 4 times as powerful as he was to begin with, when you count the beast and multi-attacks and spells and all the hit points, and his armor class is up to 19 or something now, right? He's starting to get magic weapons. He's got a +1 sword or a +1 bow and arrow, right? The champion's character has only gone up by like a few percentage points of a few powers. His stun hasn't gone up. His defenses haven't gone up yet, right? They've been around for the same number of sessions. But think how much more like its original inception this champion's character plays, which means that the GM doesn't have to adjust his design of the scenario to take into account the power curve in champions that way, because it's just not as extreme, right? Double it again. The champion's character is now a 290-point character. He's probably still throwing around 10d6. His defenses went up to 23 PDED. He's got a skill level, so he hits more often, and his presence went up to 15, and now he's got 45 stun. The champion's character is 10th level and is taking on Ancient Dragons. I'm sorry, the D&D character is 10th level and is taking on Ancient Dragons. So you see the difference. A 10d6 character with 23 PDED, a little bit more presence, and 45 stun isn't any harder to challenge than the first 250-point character as a GM. They can't do substantially more out of combat, right? Assuming that they're putting their points into combat abilities. And they don't have any way to break the game. You're not going to suddenly grow a 25-point extra dimensional movement on a champion's character. It doesn't happen. Whereas in D&D, you get to the right level, teleport all over the world now. And so once the characters can teleport all over the world, the GM has to change how he thinks about travel, or she. The GM has to change how they think about the distances between things, right? You start getting sending, right? This was a major pain in the ass to me, because the cleric had sending, and he could keep, like, anytime he was getting ready to take a long rest and he had a spell slot left, he would use sending to ask questions of people far away and get information that the party wouldn't normally have access to. So I had to be ready for that, right? I had to be prepared. Fortunately, I had watched enough Critical Role and seen them do it enough on Critical Role that I knew the cleric could do it before he got it. And I was kind of expecting it, although I didn't expect them to do it to the extent that they did, right? Initially. But I constantly had to be ready for, what is this guy's uncle going to say when he casts Sending and asks him what's happening? What is this mayor going to say when they cast Sending to the mayor? What is, the girl in the other plane, the guy's girlfriend who was in the astral plane, going to say if they contact her and ask her what's up? Because you can do other planes, right? You can basically cast Sending anywhere. And so it's brief, but you can talk to people like texting them. It's like literally D&D's version of texting, and you can text anyone. They don't even have to have a cell phone. And so if the GM isn't ready for that, that changes the nature of how communication works in his world. And that's at low levels. Right? Then once you start getting teleport and scrying and stuff, where you can see anything anywhere, you can go anywhere. You can scry to a place and then teleport to it, right? That kind of thing completely changes the nature of travel and transportation in D&D, right? Give the party a portable hull, and all of a sudden what they can carry changes. And not only that, but if you look at Matt Colville's video where he talks about it, like, you can use a portable hull to transport the party, right? So literally my flying character, the Aarakocra, if they had a portable hull, which I never gave them for exactly this reason, right? You can, any kind of a challenge that requires you to, like, not, to cross something like a bridge or a chasm, it would be a challenge with the Aarakocra because he can't carry everybody normally, and with a portable hull, they could all climb into the portable hull. They have like an hour of breathable air, and then he can fold it up, put it in his pocket like a hanky, and fly across a chasm, and then unfold it, and they climb out. Right? So this completely changes the nature of encumbrance and transportation. In Matt Colville's game, he talked about how his players got into a portable hull, then the one player picked up the portable hole, put it in his pocket, took a potion of gaseous form or something, and then drifted through cracks in the rock to go like past a rock fall to the other side of the dungeon. And thus bypassing almost the entire dungeon. Right? Now, Colville's a good, experienced DM, and it didn't throw him off too much. But how many DMs would be ready for that and would be able to build content that could account for that? Not all of us. And even if we can, doing that is something that you don't have to do at low levels and you do have to do at high levels. So what I'm saying here is that by having a really extreme power curve, D&D exacerbates the problem that happens in any game, where as the power and nature of the characters changes, what they're doing in game changes by necessity. It must. And that means you have to do different types of things to prep. You have to make different types of content. And as the developers of City of Heroes quite clearly showed with their high-level content, not everybody is equally good at creating all the different tiers of content. And I think Champions really is helpful to GMs in this regard, because in Champions, really the nature of the game does not change all that much, because at most, your character will be maybe 50% more powerful statistically and mechanically at the end of its life when it retires at 400 points or something than it was at 250 points when it started. You won't go from throwing 9 die 6 energy blasts to throwing 90 die 6 energy blasts. You'll go from throwing 9 to 12 or 13 or 14. You won't go from having 20 PDED to having 60. You go from having 20 to having 28, right? You won't go from a 3 speed to a 12 speed. You'll go from a 5 to a 6, maybe. You won't go from having an 8 OCV and no levels to having a 16 OCV and 20 levels to hit, right? You'll go from an 8 OCV maybe to a 9 and 2 levels. And so the increase is linear and additive rather than multiplicative or exponential. And so it's easier to manage for the game master. Yeah, you're probably going to be fighting more like Darkside rather than Foxbat when you're a powerful Champions character. But you're not going from fighting, a kid in the schoolyard at low-level Champions to fighting Thanos at high level. Right? You're just going from fighting the Geodesics to fighting Firewing. It's not that big of a power curve, right? The Geodesics aren't that much weaker than Firewing that it's a completely different game at the end from how it was at the beginning. Whereas in D&D, it's a completely different game. Death is not a barrier. Resurrection is trivial. You can wish. You can teleport all over the world. You can go to other planes. The cleric can contact his god, and at high level has about a 50% chance of just getting the god to intervene and do what he wants, like an automatic wish. Right? And that's just a clerical ability. It's not even a spell. And all clerics get it. Divine intervention. And they get it starting at 10th level, and you have to roll percentile dice below your level. So by 20, sorry, it's not 50%, it's a 20% chance, but by 20th level, there's a 20% chance that the deity is just going to intervene for you. And statistically, that means if you ask 5 times, one of those times the deity is going to come in and do divine intervention for you. That can't generally happen in Champions. And there are lots of games it can't happen in. And then you have D&D and Pathfinder and stuff, which are games where it can happen. Now, this doesn't necessarily make D&D bad. I do find it harder to run. It doesn't necessarily make it bad. And it doesn't mean you can't do the transitions from one level to another. You certainly can, and I did, and lots of people do. But you have to be aware that this is happening, and you have to make sure that you understand those consequences, and you have to be fortunate enough to be blessed with the talent or the skill set of being able to do all those different types of challenges and run them equally well. Right? I would argue I'm not as good at running the high-level stuff, at least in Dungeons and Dragons. And so, and I also don't enjoy it as much. So I like the lower level game, and this can be problematic because how do you keep it at the lower level game? Some people will agree to it. If you watch the Dungeon Craft channel, Professor Dungeon Master talks about how his group has been playing the same campaign since like the early 2000s or something. And when he was asked, he was in a video with Seth Skorkowski, and they were being interviewed by a third person. I can't remember who. And Seth Skorkowski said to him, how have you been, like, how are you doing that in terms of, like, what level are they? And he said, oh, they're like 6th or 7th level. How are they 6th or 7th level? Well, they realized as players and as a GM that their bread and butter, right, what they're good at is that level of play. And so he just doesn't give out XP. And the players all agreed to it because they recognize that he's a better GM at that level, and they like going on the adventures that he runs at that level. So if you can get the players to agree to it, you could just say, we're not going to level up. And Luke Hart has all of these alternative rewards that he's even put a magazine out about for his DM Lair magazine. So if you want to get that, I'm not trying to shill for anybody, but it's just like he's got a whole article on how to do this, and it's all different kinds of rewards like strongholds, noble titles, etc., that you can give to players that don't buff their powers and their XP level, but can feel good and rewarding to them. And so I think that's what Professor Dungeon Master does. He gives them other rewards, and as a consequence, they don't level up. But unless you can get your players to agree to that, the unfortunate consequence of playing the game is that by its nature, it causes players to level up, the characters to level up, and that's going to change the way the game works and could move the game into, for instance, for me, you're out of your comfort zone and into the part that you're not as good at. So I think this is something that I'm probably going to have a long talk with my players about if I ever run a game again. And I would say I don't know how it'll work in Savage Worlds, so I wouldn't necessarily do it for Savage Worlds. I'm never going to run another D&D 5e game. But if I did, one of the conversations we'd have to have is, guys, I feel like my skill set is best matched to the level like 1 to 8 game. And after we get above 8th, 9th level, I don't feel like I'm that great at designing adventures for challenging those characters. I feel like, first of all, those adventures aren't as fun to design. Second of all, they aren't as fun to run. And third of all, I'm not as good at doing them. Partly because they're not as fun, right? So I'm not as invested. But just partly because I'm just not as good at them, which maybe is why they're not as fun, right? Because it's not my wheelhouse. It's not my specialty. It's not my talent, right? And so as players, we're going to have to talk about how are we going to do this. So one option, for example, is there's a game called 5 Torches Deep, which is a reskin of D&D that stops at level 9. And why? Because they said this is a game about dungeon crawling and old school D&D dungeon delving, and there's kind of no point to doing that above 9th level because your characters are too powerful. So they just stopped the game at level 9. There's no provision for going over that level in that game. Lion and Dragon is a game that stops at level 10, probably for the same reason. Original D&D stopped at level 10. So I could see going to one of those games, perhaps. Think, let's not play 5e, but let's play 5 Torches Deep. Maybe the players would agree to that. Other than my best friend, he won't agree to that because he wants to be 20th level. But maybe the rest of the players would agree to it. I don't know. But I think we're going to have a heart-to-heart talk where I explain to them that, guys, this isn't my passion, my love for what we're doing is not the Marvel Cinematic Universe epic god-killing stuff. It's the lower tier, street hero type stuff that you're doing at the beginning. And I find that a lot more enjoyable to run and easier to make up adventures for. Now, ironically, in Champions, I don't have this problem. I'm okay at making up epic supervillain adventures, but I think the reason is that it's just a fundamentally different game. You're not abandoning the style of play to get into the higher tier, because in D&D, the style of play, which is the dungeon crawling, the survival horror of the deep dark dungeon, that's an entire style of play that, to some degree, as Five Torches Deep explains, has to be abandoned once you get into the double-digit levels because it's simply not a challenge for the player characters anymore. In Champions, you can have an epic fight on a city street with Galactus with high-level, high-powerful characters, right? In other words, you're not abandoning the battle on the city street to get into high levels. You can totally do it. It's just that instead of battling the geodesics, you're battling Galactus, right? And yeah, the powers going off are going to be different, and you're going to have to take some different measures to protect innocence from Galactus compared to the geodesics or Foxbat, right? But the idea of being able to run a battle on a city street against a villain and protect innocence while you're doing it doesn't go away in Champions from the beginning to the end of play. It stays there. You keep doing it, or you can if you want to. And so I think the fundamental nature of the game doesn't change, and it's because the power curve doesn't go up that much. And it's also because of the tropes of the genre. The dungeon delving trope is a swords and sorcery trope, which is designed for the mortal hero fighting against slightly more than mortal enemies in a down-to-earth, immediate adventure, right? Whereas the epic stuff is designed for the superheroic, godlike Marvel Cinematic Universe type characters fighting demigods, right? And so when you're doing that, that fundamentally changes the nature of the game. And you have to abandon what you used to do. And for me, it's abandoning my strength and playing into my weakness. Which is why my final adventure ended up being a gimmicky dungeon crawl, right? It wasn't a regular dungeon crawl. It was one where there were these portals, and they had to shut down the portals, and they had to teleport from room to room, and the rooms are all disconnected. So they couldn't scout it out. They couldn't use any of their like super abilities to try and like short circuit the dungeon and go to the boss. I made sure that they couldn't do that. But that was a kludge that I created so that I could still do a final dungeon crawl for the last adventure. Because that's my strength, and that's kind of what I like to do. And the players seem to enjoy it, but I think they also felt like, wow, we had all these abilities that we never got to use because they weren't applicable here. And there might have been some disappointment there, which, if it's true, I feel bad about. But that's my strength that I was trying to play to. So I tried to kludge the high-level D&D together to try and make it as much like a dungeon crawl as I still could, because that's in D&D what I'm good at creating. And so I think I'm going to have, if I run even something like Savage Worlds for the players, and certainly something like D&D ever again, we're going to have to talk about how, look, for a fantasy game, I have certain strengths, and my strengths are around dungeon delving and crypts and building out cool dungeons and cool environments. It doesn't have to be an indoor dungeon. It could be in a forest or something. But like exploration and fighting monsters and solving puzzles and that kind of thing. Palace intrigue is not my strength, which is something you could do at any level, right? Planar stuff is not my strength or my interest, which is going to disappoint the heck out of my best friend who's super interested in extra planar stuff. Cosmic, like not cosmic horror is cool. That's okay, but like cosmic level fight Thanos, Marvel Cinematic Universe, epic, that's not where my strength lies. And I would like us to play to my strengths. So what do you guys think about doing something like Five Torches Deep where level 9 is max? And then we, if you get there, we'll just start another campaign with new characters. I don't know how they would receive it. I know my best friend would be very unhappy about it. I don't know how the rest of the group would receive it. I know one of the other players, who's currently the temporary GM, said he feels like the sweet spot of D&D is level 5 to 8. That it gets you into your character, but it's not too overpowered, and he feels like once you go over level 8, it's too much. So he might be okay with it, and I think the new player also said she felt like after they hit 6th or 7th level, the game got unrelatable. The character just became so powerful that she didn't feel like her character was just a gnome in Rome anymore. It was now like a superhero. So we have the possibility that a couple of the players might be okay with stopping at level 9, or say in Savage Worlds just going up to veteran rank and then starting over again, and maybe, I mean, I would be willing to say let's try going to heroic and legendary rank once and see what I can make of it. But if it gets too gonzo crazy overpowered, I would then say from now on we're going to consider the end of veteran rank to be the retirement level of the characters, and then we'll make up new characters, because I'm not good at that higher tier, right? Where the adventures are, where you're teleporting all over the world and you're wishing and you're getting deity interventions to solve all your problems. And then how do I make a challenge when you can do those things? It's easy to envision a challenge for rat catchers. There are rats in the basement, go kill them. It's hard to envision a challenge for somebody who can scry, wish, teleport, and power word kill. How do I challenge that character? You can. It's not impossible. And I can do it, but doing it isn't my strength. And so the question becomes, can we find a way to play into my strengths that's fun for everybody? And I think that's true for other GMs as well. You should figure out what your strengths are and then try to play to those. But have an honest conversation with your players about what those strengths are. And if you're not good at the epic scale stuff and you want to stop at 9th level, talk to them about playing a game like 5 Torches Deep, or just saying, look, when you get to this level, it retires, or doing what Professor Dungeon Master does and just saying, guys, we're gonna stay at low level. Like maybe leave the leveling the same till 3rd level, and then say we're gonna multiply by 10 how many experience you need to gain levels 4 and above, and then it'll just take forever. And then you're slowly gaining experience. Eventually, you level up, but that you can play many, many, many dungeons before you level up again, and you have a long-term campaign that you don't have to deal with the changing of the tiers. So I didn't expect this to be that long of a rant, but I think there's a lot of meat here. Please feel free to leave comments and what your thoughts are. I think that games, you have to have some sort of a power curve. It's true in all games. But I think some games make it harder than others by making the power curve be almost like this exponential jump instead of a linear jump. And I think game designers could have learned an awful lot more than they did from Champions. Too many of them didn't learn the lessons from Champions. Maybe they didn't know about it. It was a pretty obscure game. But if you look at how Champions worked, it let your characters feel like they were getting more powerful without them getting wildly overpowered, right? They got a little more powerful, added a die of damage. Well, it only went from 8 to 9 dice. It's not that big of a deal, right? Whereas if you're doing 1d6 and you add a die of damage, you're doubling damage. And that is a big deal. And so by easing you into going up instead of rocketing you up, Champions doesn't really have tiers of play. And that means you can run it the same way. I mean, that's why I was able to run a 2-year Champions campaign and go from fighting the Geodesics to fighting Darkside, and I never had to change my skill set because the fundamental things we were doing in game were the same from the beginning to the end, right? The stories were changing, the battles were getting more complex, but the nature of the game didn't change. Whereas in D&D, I became increasingly uncomfortable as the players leveled up because what I had planned was a series of 20 dungeons, and I started to realize that dungeons don't work after 7th or 8th or 9th level the way they work. And not only was it taking too long, but it was the types of challenges I was having to rack my brain to create were not in my comfort zone, right? It was very awkward and hard for me to do. Now, I did it. It was a challenge. I don't mind a challenge, but I would have been a lot happier just making more dungeons. Different dungeons, creative dungeons, interesting dungeons, right? And again, not all just caves, but the kinds of challenges I was creating at low level, I had a blast making up those challenges. And then after we got to 7th or 8th level, it started to feel more like work than fun. So if this is something that you struggle with as well, I urge you to do what I'm going to do, which is talk to your players and say, look, guys, I know that leveling up is fun and you all like to do it, but I'm better at this tier. And either, if it's a high tier, let's start in the high, or quickly get to the high tier so that we can spend time there. And if it's low tier, let's cap it somehow so that we can stay in my sweet spot. You'll get better adventures that way, and we'll have more fun. Unless leveling up is how you have fun, which is what one of my best friend has always said. So yeah, that's potentially an issue, and I don't know how to solve that one. It's something that he and I may have to talk about at some point if I ever run a D&D game or a Savage Worlds game or something for him. But that's something long in the future. And until next time, guys, I think we're done here. So this is Scrapperlock, and this has been Scrapperlock Rants on the Rebirth server.